I'm comfortable.
You got water?
Yeah, I got water.
Okay, we're in business.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, welcome to the space. Welcome to Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center. Welcome to the Wanda Coleman Theater. I'm glad you folks are here with us today. I want to set the stage for you folks for the LA book launch of a translator's memoir by Suzanne Jill Levine here with us today. My name is Jimmy Vega. I am the interim executive director of Beyond Baroque. I'd like to start by acknowledging Beyond Baroque's presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tonga peoples. We acknowledge the wrong done to these peoples through settler colonialism, genocidal practices, and the violent disposition of their land. As an arts organization, this is very important to us. We are here in the space to uplift indigenous communities, their stories, and cultures. For those who don't know, Beyond Baroque is Los Angeles' oldest literary arts center here in Los Angeles. We exist to support writers of every level, from emerging to established, and we do that here in this space, which used to be the old Venice City Hall. Beyond Baroque started first as an experimental literary magazine, and now we have all of this. So we exist to support writers. We do this through a number of ways, readings, conversations, of course, workshops, fellowships, what have you. We offer a number of those workshops online, so I do invite you all to take part if you're interested in beginning to write or cultivate a writing practice, whether that be fiction or poetry. We have a Monday night fiction workshop and a Wednesday night poetry workshop, and those are completely free and online. Inside this theater, inside the Wanda Coleman Theater, we host over 150 readings and performances a year. So that's a lot of work, and we're excited. We're excited to have Jill here and Erik to be part of that. If you don't already have Valentine's Day plans, we do have another Los Angeles book launch that afternoon. For This Time, This Place by Susan Suntry. That's going to feature Tom Lachis, Richard Modiano, and some others. And on February 21st, we will be hosting Heidi Seaborn, Erin Marie Lynch, Matthew Gelman, and Nick Martino here in the space. That was a bit of a rescheduled event. So I invite you all to come back, check all of that out on the website. After the reading, we will have a bit of a reception out here in the lobby, and I welcome you all to hang back for that. There's books in the bookstore, of course, and the art in the gallery is by the artist Victor Mortales. The exhibition is titled Language is a Place. So please do check all of that out. Again, since 1968, we have existed to nurture generations of writers here in Los Angeles. We can't do that without your support. So if you're not already a member, I do encourage you to become a member. And before we get this show on the road, I want to just give a quick thanks to our staff. They're the ones that are making all of this possible. So big shout out to Erik in the booth. Thank you, Erik. And we've got Genesis around in the bookstore if you need any assistance. But I think that's it from me. To introduce Jill and Erik here, Suzanne Jill Levine is a distinguished research professor emerita of Spanish and Portuguese at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and recipient of the 2024 Penn Ralph Manheim Award for Translation, which recognizes the translator's lifetime achievements. An eminent translator whose prolific literary career began in the early 1970s, she has won many honors and translated over 40 volumes of Latin American fiction. Editor and co-translator of the 5-volume series of Jorge Luis Borges' poetry and nonfictions, for Penguin Paperback Classics. Her most recent translation, Guadalupe Natel's Bizarre and Other Unsettling Stories, was shortlisted for the 2021 Oxford Weidenfeld Prize. She's also author of The Subversive Scribe, translating Latin America fiction, and the biography Manuel Puig and the Spider Woman, His Life and Fictions. Erik Noonan is the author of the poetry collections Stances and Haiku'd Eat, and his poems appear in the anthology Crossstrokes. His manuscript translation of Ricardo Pigla's La Invasión won the 2025 Sundial House Literary Translation Award from Columbia University, and in 2024 he received a South Asian Literature and Translation Travel Grant from the University of Chicago. A former editor at Tri-Quarterly Los Angeles Review, another Chicago magazine, and Asymptote. He is managing director at Jackleg Press and assistant dean at the San Francisco Film School. Please welcome Suzanne Jill Levine and Erik Noonan.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. I think for both of us, we also want to thank you and the wonderful staff, and how, it's just amazing that this wonderful institution keeps going and with such dynamic, presence in LA. So bravo to you guys for this, really.
Thank you to Jimmy and Erik and Yvonne and Genesis for putting this together. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And thanks everybody for coming. So we're doing another event. This is the second of two. Mm-hmm. The first one was in San Francisco at City Lights. That's recorded, and you guys can see that if you're curious to know what it was like. We'll do something slightly different, I think, because of where we are, and we don't want to repeat ourselves. So it'll be a new conversation, and we're sort of making it up as we go.
That's right.
Jill is important to me because I feel close to Latin American literature in a way that is hard for me to explain or even understand. And so I see her as coming before us, forging a way for cultures to meet on the page and socially. I have a great deal of admiration for Jill because of the way she's lived her life. And so for me, it's about more than just books, more than just literature. It's a way of living. And so that's why I wanted to be a part of this event, if I can speak on a personal level.
And I'm very grateful.
Means a lot to me. Yeah, thank you.
Erik's presence here.
Yeah, thank you. And so I'm going to ask her to read a passage or two, and then maybe we can use that as a way to start the conversation. And I'd also like to know what you have to say about the book in general and where you see it, where it fits in your oeuvre, and what it's like to write a memoir. And
okay.
Maybe we can start that way.
Okay. Well, thank you, Erik. And I'm very lucky to have this wonderful interlocutor. He keeps me on the path. As I tend to digress a lot, so it's a very good thing. I mean, some of you here are my friends, so for you it's going to be kind of repetitive, and I'm sorry, but maybe I'll say it in a different way. Who knows? In any case, welcome everybody, and to begin with, people often ask me why I call this book Unfaithful, a translator's memoir, but actually. One writer wrote to me and said, actually, you're very faithful. You're really faithful to these amazing writers that you translated for about 40, 50 years. And I said, I understand. And Unfaithful is, to a certain extent, an ironic title. But it also celebrates subversiveness, which is also the title, the title of my first book. And in a way, this memoir is kind of part of a trilogy that I think, in part, tries to clarify to the public what a translator is and what a translator does, and the significance of literary translation. So my first book was The Subversive Scribe, and it was also written in particularly thinking about academe as I was since I'm not independently wealthy, I had to go, and translators are miserably paid, so I had to make a living as an academic. One of my realizations, at least at the times that I began, which is late 60s, early 70s, is that, while translators, particularly of poets, poet translators were recognized for their work, in general, academe did not see translation as a scholarly labor. And in a way, it is. I mean, it's a scholarly labor as well as a writerly labor, and also it really, people who really know languages really well are the ones who translate. So there's a lot of scholarly elements to translation. So that, in part, that was one of the reasons why I wrote that book. But also, since I was just beginning to translate at that time, I was, 22, 23, and I had the good fortune, and that's what I say at the beginning of this book, I have the good fortune to be living in New York City, to be connected with Columbia University, to have, had a good education, and to be in the city at a time when there was a sudden recognition of these great writers coming from Latin America. In part, this is because publishers, American publishers, followed the good example of French publishers. So the French had already published Borges, Jorge Luis Borges, and were publishing other writers. And so, and Garcia Marquez, of course, was one of the first that really kind of hit a larger audience, one would say, 100 Years of Solitude, which also was, curiously enough, the book that convinced me to follow the academic field, because I thought, this book is so wonderful. I want to, always be involved with literature and teaching literature because of this book. Basically, I really was at a time when there was possibilities. There were a lot of possibilities to be involved with this marvelous new literature. And why do I write this book today? Because in a sense, they're all gone. And so, and actually starting with my book, The Subversive Scribe, they were already beginning to vanish. So I feel that, and the reason why I wrote my second book, which was a biography of Manuel Puig, who's one of the writers who I really was most connected with in many ways, and who I translated 4 of his books. In a sense, he died at that time, and his death was kind of shocking because he was fairly young. So I think his death really set off the desire to write the biography, which is the first, I think it's the only biography that exists, at least in English, of Manuel Puig, the great, who's most known, I guess, for Kiss of the Spider Woman, but who was the author of several really wonderful novels, especially his first novels were really particularly amazing. And who was also very engaged with the movies. I mean, his books reflected the world of the spectator, and he, in some ways, was the first writer to really focus on the spectator in his works, beginning with the first book, which was La Traición de Rita Hayworth, the betrayal of Rita Hayworth, which we called Betrayed by Rita Hayworth, because the past participle worked much better than the noun. So that's an example of betrayal, unfaithfulness right there.
So it's wonderful that we're having this conversation in Los Angeles, because so much of the vernacular of the writers you translated, and some of the reason why this was able to be an international movement, was that they had in common the mythology of Hollywood.
That's right. Yeah, and basically, curiously enough, the first 2 writers, again, that I really was working on and translating, were totally involved with the movies. In other words, Cabrera Infante, the Cuban writer, was basically that was the first book really that I translated, but it was actually done in collaboration with the author. and who was a marvelous polyglot himself. And of course, being from Cuba, which you have to remember that Cuba, before being the Cuba of Fidel, was the Cuba of the gangsters of New York. You know, so basically, English was a second language almost in Havana.
So this is Guillermo
Cabrera Infante.
and
Yeah.
he was anti-Bautista, and his father founded the Cuban Communist Party.
That's right. His parents, his father and mother. Yeah.
His parents,
Yeah.
and then he was pretty outspoken anti-Fidel,
That's right.
and spent pretty much the rest of his life abroad
That's right.
because he got in trouble. But what was the first novel called?
Well, the
Tell us
first
about
novel that we published was called in Spanish Tres Tristes Tigres, which means literally three sad tigers. But it's actually from a sort of a little ditty or fable, you know, Tres Tristes Tigres en un trigal. It's a tongue twister, you know, it's like basically the English equivalent would be a peck of pickled peppers, okay? Tres Tristes, but we weren't going to call it a peck of pickled peppers because somehow the tigers had to be in there. So the tigers had to be in there. And they were sad tigers because it was a very critical and, you know, I would say traumatic time, the time of the revolution, which is, in a sense, his novel kind of portrays actually Havana. And it's mainly, he's a writer of Havana more than Cuba. He actually said that. He said, I'm not a Cuban writer, I'm a writer from Havana. Okay. By the way, he hated the words that the description Latin American writer. He thought it was very incorrect because these writers are from 20 different countries, not to talk about many different cities, and there's a great deal of diversity in all those worlds. Anyway, but so he was the writer of Havana, and this was basically truly the eve of the revolution, and it was a curious book because at first this book was going to be called View of Dawn in the Tropics, which would be Vista del Amanecer Trópico. And it was going to be kind of an homage to the new Cuba. It was going to sing the praise of the revolution. But because of censorship, which he protested, he and other writers, that was going on, he and other writers were cast out of the country, basically, these people. And he started to write in exile. First, he was a consul, I think, in the consul in Brussels, and ultimately found his home in exile in England, in London. So he began to write really this book that initially was singing to the revolution more as a kind of an elegy to the Cuba that was, okay, and to the Cuba that he lived as a writer, as a a journalist, a writer, and this book was marvelous because the main character was all the creatures of the night. They're artists, actors, actresses, writers. And musicians, great musicians, and of course, as we know, Cuban music is really something. So that was, in a way, Cuban music was as one of the, let's say, passions that you feel in this novel.
So even from the beginning of your career, you're involved in celebrating worlds that have already vanished.
That's
and
right.
That is also in part what the book is about. You say, because it's lovely to hear these stories, but of course the book is about your life.
That's right.
It's about what you yourself lived. So you say, toward the beginning, what remains in memory, what I am trying earnestly to bring back to life, is ultimately tenuous, dreamlike, a magical trace of nights roaming the Cavabaja, or festive fairs like the night of San Juan along the river with Jose, Ramon, or Miguel, or some other long-forgotten boyfriend.
Boyfriend, right.
There's a lot of romance.
There's
in
a lot
this
of
book.
romance. There's a lot of romance in this book, and hence there's some unfaithfulness, obviously, because if you have a lot of romance, it's hard to be faithful, right? Unless it's all to the one person. So, but anyway, yes, there's a lot of romance, and most of it totally unexpected, because in other words, I met Manuel Puig, for example, after, actually during the time I was translating Cabo Infante, I met Manuel Puig, was introduced to him by this wonderful man who was actually a very important person in my life, Emir Rodriguez Monigal, a brilliant, brilliant literary critic, and really who did a lot to promote these writers, particularly the more marginal writers, because in a way, when you think of, let's say Garcia Marquez or Vargas Llosa, they were sort of more mainstream, and a lot of the writers that I translated were actually, in some ways, more marginal in different ways, often because they were homosexuals, and their work was very
Political dissidents, certainly.
Political
also.
dissidents, and definitely very experimental in ways that were also different from the other books, but. And of course, in the case, of Cabo Infante, because he was actually initially marginalized in a very dramatic way. I mean, there was a lot of writers were against him. Garcia Marquez, Cortázar, they were against him because he had opposed, criticized Fidel.
So true to his name, this older man, Emir Monegal, treats you as an equal.
Yes, as his name, if you think of his name, Monegal, it's in French, you would say it was my equal. So that's actually, I think the name is actually, I think it's either Catalan, I think it's a Catalan name. Because as you know, in Latin America, everybody is, they're from either, their family is from Catalonia or from Galicia or, so there's a lot of variety. So I think that Emir's, there was a lot of Gallego-Catalan thing going on.
And through him, you met
Manuel Puig. Yeah, and of course Cabo Infante and many other writers. So, and Manuel Puig was a real character. When I first met him, I immediately had a crush on him because he was handsome. And, and even though he was gay, that didn't put me off. So, a lot of women had the same reaction. He was really, I mean, obviously, after a while, he wasn't so handsome because he lost his hair. But when I first saw him, he was very handsome. Anyway, so I don't know if these guys are, I'm sorry to be offensive in any way. But anyway.
Tell us how you really feel. Now, you just did a featurette for the Criterion Collection.
Yes, I
for
did.
The re-release of Kiss of the Spider Woman.
Yes, indeed.
What was it like to do that?
Oh, it was great fun.
Was it?
Because I was asked to, in other words, the Criterion Collection, which is, as you know, is a marvelous collection of classic cinema, has just re-released the original film, Kiss of the Spider Woman, probably in part because there's this new film that's sort of a musical, with Jennifer Lopez. Yeah. So yes. So I was interviewed, obviously, because I had written the biography, but also because they knew that I had. Actually, in that biography, there's one chapter about the making of the film, which took a whole year to write because it was so complicated to deal with all the people in Hollywood who had to be interviewed and stuff like that.
Getting permissions or getting to talk to them at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole thing was very complicated. And also, ultimately, I had to use, in some cases, I had to attribute some stories to somebody else because the person who told me the story did not want the story to be attributed. So anyway, this gives you an idea of how complex the story was. So I had to, for the Criterion, I had to mainly was being asked about how the book I was actually adapted into a film and the part that Manuel Puig played in this. And for him, like as for many authors, there was a lot of pain involved, as well as pleasure, because obviously it's a great thing for an author to have his or her book made into a film, but you have to deal with a lot of compromise. And so, and he was being involved in the process, involved that. So yeah, it was fun, but I wanted to be able to make the picture as clear as possible.
It's an old theme, certainly, of when the Hollywood myth becomes a reality in one's own life, there's a price to be paid.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And for writers as well, so
Mm-hmm.
you were quite intimately involved with Manuel Puig, and,
Right.
and there's a sense of unfaithfulness there too in your working
Right.
relationship.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, because that story also was very complex. Yeah. Well, there's a sense in terms of, well, first of all, working with him made it much more possible to be unfaithful to the original text, because I was working with him and finding solutions that were not exactly literal, but that really worked well in representing the spirit of what and really the content of what the text was talking about, but in obviously another language. Any translation is like it's the same thing as a film adaptation. It's in another language. The media film is another language. So just think the same thing when you translate a novel from English to Spanish, from French to English. It's another language and another medium. So you have to think of this as truly a creative effort to make it work, despite what are the limitations of one medium compared to the other. So anyway, yeah, but there was certainly, and the first book we did together was Betrayed by Rita Hayworth. And by the way, he told me that he finally got to meet Rita Hayworth, and she was very pleased that there was a book that had her name on the cover. So I thought that was a sort of fulfilling experience for him. Anyway, but I think what Erik wants is for me to tell you some more some stories about me and Manuel as unconventional lovers. So I'll just read one little bit for you, and which when we were translating his third novel, which is called The Buenos Aires Affair. And this is funny because his second novel, Boquitas Pintadas, which are the words from a song in Spanish, and which was a novel that was totally saturated with the tango. In other words, the tango was one of the main themes and main content in some ways of how people thought of their lives vis-a-vis the passions as described in tangos, which of course very unrealistic. So because water. Thank you. Because it had been so difficult to find a translation for Boquitas Pintadas. I mean, I think we came up with a pretty good one, Heartbreak Tango. But, sorry, it's a little dry here. Maybe you should read this. See.
I would be happy to.
Okay.
Sure. Shall I?
Yeah, why don't you?
Okay. I have it here.
Yeah, I'll find it for you. Yeah. So anyway, we're going to read a scene in which Manuel and I are both working and not working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the apartment would be dark inside.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you want to read that?
This is.
I'll let Erik do the reading.
The apartment would be dark inside, the shades drawn. Manuel would have just showered, and my first sensation when he opened the door was the clean smell of his freshly applied Pond's cold cream. This was the very same facial cream my mother and other women her generation used to wear. And for a while after our affair, I would still associate the fragrance of my mother's generic skin cream with erotic ecstasy. Sex was the first order of business before our editing session, as he preferred this sequence. Invariably, we'd take our time, then leap out of bed, sheets and clothes strewn everywhere, get our clothes back on, and from sexual athletes, we turned into copy editors. So businesslike, we focused on the Buenos Aires affair on the page, the pleasures of the text, after playing the absurd roles of Leo and Gladys on Norberto's bed.
Very well done. I couldn't have done it better.
I didn't think I would get, it didn't occur to me to ask if I could read.
Well, and then there's the downside of having because they say you should never mix business with pleasure. So there is the downside to such closeness.
I don't think they teach editing like that anymore
No, I don't think so.
these days.
Unfortunately,
Take a class.
Well,
Do you recommend that procedure?
it's a close reading. That's what I'll say. It's a close reading. Yeah. So I recommend it, but not in all cases. So
The youth need guidance.
I'm here to guide
You
you.
need to know what to do.
So if you need any doubts, just go right ahead. Yeah. So, but there were issues that were problematic. We finished translating the Buenos Aires affair, which was a rather, which by the way, a book that was censored in Argentina, and after that censorship, he never returned to Argentina. So he left Argentina then, it was about 1973, and never really returned to the country.
That would have been right at the beginning of the dictatorship.
Yes. And indeed, his life and the life of his family had been threatened. And what was considered censorable or censorious in his novel was the fact that he was talking about sexual relationships in context with talking about Perón. Therefore, it was, you can't talk about the god Perón if you're also mentioning sex in the same book. So that was actually the reason, which is so already sick, right? So
People still get in their feelings about Perón.
yeah. So it was really, it showed you the extremism of that particular, how politics really invaded the world of the writer. Anyway, but ultimately, as I say here, the dalliances with Manuel led to what had their downside because we were so close, and he felt that he could ask me to translate the next book, which was Kiss of the Spider Woman, without having a contract from a publisher, just to go ahead and translate it. And it's possible that I would have done that if I hadn't been on the verge of accepting an academic job, which for me was already terrifying, and that I knew that I would be totally submerged in trying to take on this new job, and my career. So, and on the other side, to be, pressured by Manuel to finish this translation in 3 weeks would have been a little difficult. So basically, I didn't translate the book, and he was very confident about his English at that time, and he figured, I could just translate this book with any old person. And it turned out that he had to go through several translators in order to get the book translated. So what's nice to tell is that at the end of, it was like near the end of his life, and the last book we translated together, which was his last novel called Cae la Noche Tropical, which we call Tropical Night Falling. It's a very, very wonderful novel. It takes place in Brazil, where he was living for a number of years. Anyway, so he really kind of felt that he said, you are the best translator, and I'm really happy that we can do this book together. And so it was really kind of a nice ending to a story that had love and conflict and all sorts of stuff involved. And so, it's a story within a story, as they were. Yeah.
So relationships often played out through the work of translation for you. There was a similar rift or tension or conflict with Cabrera Infante.
That was different, yeah. No, that was not sexual. We were platonic friends.
Yes. But I wouldn't.
You explain it.
Suggesting no.
Oh, yeah.
But
he knows better. But it does.
But there was a departure in your life.
Yes.
Of which he did not approve at that time.
Oh, that's true.
And that manifested in.
That's true.
In the tensions between you. So.
That's true.
What I'm curious about or interested in is
Yeah.
the way the relationships are playing out in the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
As you do it.
Yeah. Well, as I explained early in the book, since I grew up as the last one of a family, and I was like a little kid surrounded by these gorgeous brother and sisters, and I explained that probably explains my bisexuality. I was attracted to both my sisters and my brother, and who wouldn't be? They were just beautiful people. So, at the time that I was working on Cabrera Infante's third and last novel that I was going to work on, called Infante's Inferno, truly was an inferno in many ways. I was also exploring a relationship with a woman, and that was my first important relationship with a woman at that time. And I think that despite all the wildness and freedom of all that he was living and that he had lived in the world of Cuba, Tres Tristes Tigres, there was definitely a kind of a patriarchal or phallocentric. Evidently,
He disapproved.
he disapproved. Yeah, he disapproved.
He was okay with gay men, but
That's right.
but women, he really had trouble with it.
That's right.
And the way it manifested, if I recall correctly, in the translation work, is that he turned it into a protracted conflict between the two of you, where the English version is 100 pages longer than the Spanish.
Yeah.
Because he kept adding things
Yeah.
for you to do to almost perversely punish you, make you do more.
Well, that's definitely that's why it was the last one I did. He succeeded, but and I went on to so many other wonderful writers. But he. It was a book that he sort of went a little too far with, and it had trouble also at being published.
This is La Habana para un
It's called
infante
Havana
difunto.
La Habana para un infante difunto, which literally means Havana for a dead princess or prince, depending upon how you want to call it. Anyway, so but that's another story.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, anyway, but.
You write well. Okay.
But one of the things that this book again is about is also about is part of a series called Translated By. So in this book, I'm trying to come to terms with how do you describe what a translator is and what a translator does. And so obviously, I felt that you had, of course, understand all of the translator's life to do that, and there were things to understand as I was a young woman then. But I think that, there's no, as I write here at the end of the book, which is almost like in my afterword, maybe this is a good thing to read. Unfaithful seeks to bring to its reader's attention a deeply personal view of the translator, with myself as protagonist, aware of performance, and the ghost of an actress, because my sister is also, who was an actress, is an element in this book, as key elements, as if the translator were almost a kind of picaresque character whose creative adventure is an erotics of translation. The translator is a lover. Translation requires an intimate closeness with the text, and at times the authors themselves, a scenario in which there is inevitably a degree of unfaithfulness and distance, as in all translations. We need to understand that what may appear as a form of betrayal allows for the translator's subjectivity and her own voice to emerge in close dialogue with the original. We need to understand that the idea of fidelity is utopic and that no literary translation could ever be completely faithful in a literal sense. So, I go into that much more, so,
It reminds me of a note that you make at the beginning of the Puig biography, to the effect that biography has to be a kind of fiction.
That's right.
So there has to be invention and embellishment and ornamentation, and you have to leave things out. Mm-hmm. Did you fictionalize? Did you see this as a kind of novel that you?
I think that, to write a book like this, a memoir, and people often ask, well, what's the difference between autobiography and memoir? Well, I think often they cross over with each other, but a memoir presupposes a point of view, and really the writer of the memoir is also the subject of the memoir. So where you say, well, autobiography too. However, I think it's the writing of the book and how it's written and the voice and the point of view or points of view you get from the voice is essentially what the writer is trying to communicate. And of course, that's just one person's point of view. So I think that that subjectivity is interesting, but I think also that through that subjectivity, I discovered things that were true about myself and that were difficult to express, but that I really wanted to express them. So it was a challenge, and I do feel that there's a doubleness, which in all translators, of course, and there's a doubleness in my narrative in the sense that both the young Jill and the person now are talking, not always at the same time, but they're sort of, they're kind of interspersed, you know. There's kind of two voices in the one voice, I think. So I don't know what that does, but my reader has to tell me that, so.
Are you going to do more writing like this?
I hope so.
Okay. Should we do questions?
We should do questions.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I have a question. I'm reading the book, telling you, when you mentioned the two voices, it brought back that you described as a 23-year-old meeting Neruda and these great names, these great authors, and where you came from.
That's right.
You were at the Vassar, but before that, you were living in a neighborhood of bullied windows.
Well, yeah, I came from a very ordinary neighborhood in upper Manhattan, Washington Heights. Actually, it's between Washington Heights and Inwood. One of the glories of that neighborhood, of course, is Fort Tryon Park that has the cloisters, which is a wonderful addition to culture in Manhattan. But basically, this was I would say middle class, lower middle class neighborhood, and you know, so for me, there was something very magical, I guess, in terms of some of the writers I met, because they were already, you know, famous and wealthy, and you know, and there were these wonderful banquets and you know all this kind of thing, and Bioy Casares and Delfino Campo were sort of like a very special couple, and writers who I both translated both of them, and important in my life, but they also were from that kind of class. I mean, they were sort of like, it's almost like they were part of the Borges group, and that was all a little bit like the Bloomsbury group, which of course is my publisher, like the Virginia Woolf and all the different art critics and writers that were in that wonderful group of writers. And so basically, I think that in some ways the naivete, there's the naivete of the young person here discovering a world, you know, a little bit like, I describe it at one point. I don't know if you guys have seen, what's that, Midnight in Paris, this Woody Allen movie. I'm a little like Owen Wilson, who, you know, suddenly steps into the, you know, the gay 90s or the roaring 20s, and oh my God. So I mean, there's a little bit of that too in my book, because, and you are, after all, discovering a world that you don't know, a world that is so rich and which the reader is going to discover. So, you know, it's kind of an exciting moment.
You s-
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So being in that world, did that make the unfaithfulness to your more middle class upbringing okay? In other words, was it like,
I mean,
there was a choosing, a choice that you couldn't say no to?
well, what do you think? You're the reader.
I wouldn't disagree.
What's your feeling about it?
The feeling about it is that in the America of the 1950s, a person could really become, in a way, Horatio Alger. They could start out and actually, not too long after their teenage years, find themselves in a wonderfully free and open environment.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's something, there's a little bit Horatio Alger. Yes, I mean, there's something also, I guess, in the book which is utopic, which is that at that time there was this whole progressive openness to Latin America. Latin America and North America and the United States had a terrible relationship, historical relationship, and this was a time when Kennedy had the something. What's that? The something for progress. Sorry, that you. What? The alignment. That's right. The Alliance for Progress. The Peace Corps. I actually went down to Colombia to visit a friend of mine who was in the Peace Corps and to get to know Latin America that way. And yeah, so there was a sort of an openness and of discovery and of hopefulness in this new relationship. Honoring the culture of Latin America through its literature. So it was a really, in some ways, a very hopeful time in that sense. And you're right; it's very much an American story. I think I know what you mean in the sense of Theodore Dreiser or somebody. I guess the class thing that you're talking about. Yeah. Yes.
I've got a question. So, academically speaking, is it preferable to have a translated piece be the literal translation, like in the case of like the Three Sad Tigers, or is it preferable for a piece to have that more intimate connection, like as you were talking about, between someone and the author, and then like having that sort of closeness come into play with the translation?
Well, obviously, translators are a very diverse group, and now there are hundreds and thousands of translators from the Spanish now who are working on literary works. So many translators do want to get close to the country, want to meet the author, but other translators actually don't want anything to do with the author because the author will try to impact their translation. And in some cases, for me, at the beginning when I worked with these writers, it was wonderful, all that I was learning. But at some point, I too became much more independent. Even though I would always consult if there's something I didn't understand or the usage I didn't understand, I would always consult. But the point of the matter is that this particularly, the kind of translation I did with Puig and Cabrera Infante was really collaboration. Whereas further along, which I always encourage collaboration because, it's very nice to collaborate with another translator. There's all sorts of ways you can translate. But yeah, I would say that there's a lot of diversity in that sense, and there are many writers. Well, obviously, if you translate Homer, you're not going to get to know him too well. You might get to know a few, maybe some scholars of Homer.
And Cabrera Infante had a word for that. He called it close laboration.
That's right. That's right. It was really great because we were always doing puns and portmanteau words, which are very Joycean, like strangerously. But yeah, like he wanted us to put on the cover of Three Trapped Tigers, close elaborated by, which would have been perfect because it was elaborated and it was close. However, Cass Canfield Jr., the publisher, said, "I'm in charge of the title page. You guys out of there." The publisher makes the final decision about titles. He was happy with the Three Trapped Tigers, but it took a while to get to that. And I think it was a very good translation because the word trapped, of course, they were trapped in the book, trapped in a historical moment, trapped in their feelings and their conflicts. So there's many things that you could say. It's almost a little bit a metonym for sad, which translation often is. Yeah.
And when you're teaching in a classroom and you are going through a translated piece with your students, does the topic of bias come up much at all, or do you just sort of take it like as it is, the text as is?
You mean when the bias of? You mean
For example, if like you know that the translator worked closely with the original author, do you sort of take some of the things that they say with? I suppose it depends on what has been translated, but just like that connection does that impact many of the texts?
Well,
that you go through?
That's a very good question. By the way, the brilliant young lady who's speaking, by the way, is I have the honor of having her as my webmaster or web mistress. So, and I
Distinguished company.
she's a very distinguished company. I hope you all get to meet her afterwards, Annabelle McClellan. Yeah, that's a very good question because often when I teach translation, I think one of the examples I use, which students always love, is Borges, because Borges is so difficult, but so interesting, you know. And there do exist several translations of his stories. And so often when we're looking at those translations, one of them is the one that he worked on with Norman Thomas Di Giovanni. And there's no doubt that that translation is more colloquial, more direct, and in some ways, you know, you could tell that liberties were taken, but liberties that actually brought you closer to the level of the language. So it's very interesting to see that. Whereas the other translations that were done, like Donald Yates, for example, are much, you know, they use kind of very rhetorical language, which of course are very similar to the words in Spanish, but you have to remember that Spanish is closer to its Latin roots, and so therefore it's colloquial at the same time it's Latinate, whereas English is not, you know, if you use the Latinate words, they're the more, let's say, cultivated words, the more rhetorical words. So it's you really have to take that into consideration. So that was an interesting example where knowing that Borges had worked on it sort of gave it a certain, you know, it was a way of explaining how and why that translation worked, which is not to say that there weren't good things about the others and there were problems with that translation. I mean, there's always a problem. So, good question. Yes, David.
You translated some poetry as well as prose.
Yes.
What is the different mindset when you approach poetry as opposed to prose? Because Frost's famous line that poetry is what's lost in translation. It seems to me, I know very little French, but I have this edition of Baudelaire, and it has two different translations, and they're really, really different.
Right.
I just wonder when you sit down to do it, is it a different gear in your brain?
For me, actually, it's not a different gear. I mean, mind you, I do not translate sonnets. Okay, I am not. In other words, I don't consider myself an expert in some of the more formal forms of poetry, but I have translated, yes, a number of poets and books of poets, etc. For me, it's the same thing. I mean, basically, I was just translating recently some poetry of this Peruvian poet who I know from New York days, Isaac Goldenberg, his name is, and I was just observing. I noticed how this poem is not working, and so you have to loosen up a bit to get closer to what the poet is saying and how he's saying it. So I really do think literary prose and poetry really have a lot in common, certainly as regards the novels and fiction that I translated, which truly, that language is like poetry. So it's that, you know, it's not that different. However, there is the issue of certain forms, and that's really difficult. And I think they're real challenge. You know, like, for example, translating Dante, you know, I mean, to tercetos, you know, and some people are really talented in bringing that up, and others, you know, are going to be sort of like a little mechanical. So it can't be mechanical. It has to work with the language, but some people are really, you know, good at it. I had the pleasure of meeting Robert Penwarren many years ago. He was already very old, and I was still young. This was my friend John Coleman. We had a lunch with him, and actually Saul Bellow was there. It was just a wonderful group of people, and I'm sorry I'm name dropping, but that was long ago. And one thing that I always remember is that Penwarren, or Red as they called him, he said, I'm always going back to Dante. I'm always rereading Dante in the Italian. And I said, because it just helps me to sort of feel, to feel poetry, to feel the language. It helps me to write in English, to read his poetry. So,
The birth of literary Italian.
That's right. That's right. So, I mean, I think a lot of poets, by the way, are translators because it is a great exercise for working on your own writing. Yes, Martin.
Jill, I want to begin by congratulating you on your book. I haven't finished it yet, but it's a wonderful read. It's been really enjoyable getting to know more about your life, and your portraits of all these great literary figures from the past are just amazing.
Thank you.
I want to ask a question that's related to something that you were commenting on before, and that is that this period in the 60s and 70s when you got your start as a translator was a time when literary and cultural relations between the United States and Latin America were becoming closer.
That's right.
So the question that I have, and I don't think you address it in the book, is you were very close to all these people. How did they view the United States? What did Emir think of American literary culture or American academia? Or what did Manuel Puig think about New York? You must have gotten a sense of that, or did they live in a bubble?
No, it's
only Latin Americans.
no. It's a broad range of responses and attitudes they had about, like Carlos Fuentes, and others about America. I think that they were highly critical politically of the relationship of North America with Latin America. I think that was pretty universal. However, they really loved certain things about American culture, which had really influenced them. I mean, let's face it, Faulkner, Hemingway, the movies. I mean, these were all very influential things in their writing. When you mention Emir, I do remember something very particular. He said, "The trouble with the United States is the automobile." And he didn't drive, and he's right, because that's what's gotten us into more trouble than anything, hasn't it? Just think about it. And you know who thought of this first? Melville, because what was Melville's Moby Dick about? It was about the chase after energy, right? That's what whale fat was. And look at the tragedy that it led to. And I think that, so I think Emir was right about that. The automobile has been our downfall. So think about it. So that, I don't know if that wasn't the question, but Manuel Puig, of course, loved the American cinema, and actually for him, the movie Sunset Boulevard was the last great movie. After that, forget about it. So that's 1950. Must be kind of hard on you young people. But yes, but they were great. I mean, these were great texts, these movies, I mean, we could give another lecture on it.
We could go.
Yeah.
We could go on and on. Maybe one more.
Yeah.
No. Okay.
Oh, okay. Well.
I have one more.
Oh yes. Go ahead.
Great.
Go ahead,
So
Mike.
this has more to do with you, Jill. You spent, you were immersed in the New York and East Coast literary life
Yes.
for a long time, and then you came to California.
Yeah.
And you've been here for a long time. So how did the two compare? And why didn't you stay in Manhattan if you hated the automobile?
That just shows that it shows you that I'm a split personality. I'm definitely bi, in all ways. Bicultural, and right down the middle. But anyway, no, I mean, yes, you're right. And I always have missed New York. And I always will miss New York. And, New York is in me, but I guess my life was an adventure too. And I think that, curiously, as a friend of mine said, the one who's leaving with the dog, New York can be very rough on you, can be very harsh. Susan Sontag once told me that you should, Jill, you should come back to New York. You should let the city roll over you, and and let it inspire you, make you work, And but curiously, I think that that having left the city was very good for my creative life, and I continued to translate as much. But I, you know, of course, I miss the city. But I had, you know, I discovered a new life.
Said somebody described you as a pavement flower.
That's right. Amir referred to me as a pavement flower. This was very notable when we visited Versailles together, and I said, "Oh, look at that field!" And I was so happy to be out in the country. I said, I ran into the field. It was full of thistles. So I was, I was, help! You know, he said, "You're a pavement flower. You don't know from this stuff." Even in Versailles. Anyway, so I don't know if I answered all your questions, but I think that one of the things that you mentioned that to me is very important is that the writers come to life in this book. Because more than anything, what writers often want to do is resurrect something. I mean, the loss, the memory, you know, is so big, and you want to, you know, I wanted to bring them back to life. So I hope I did a little bit of that. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for being here. Thank you. Thank you. Erik for being here. And if anybody wants me to sign a book, I'm always happy.